What's up guys, this is tcgsam here, and in today's video I'm coming at you guys with my first place undefeated Mannadium Scareclaw deck that I took to a tournament and went 4-0 with, and the tournament before that I went 3-1 with it as well. So it's an incredibly strong deck against the entire meta right now, and I'm going to show you guys why. With all that being said, let's hop straight into the deck profile. So starting off with the main Mannadium engine, we are playing 3 copies of Visas Starfrost. It's the best card in your deck. It's the name for your Vicious Astrolabe fusion. It's also able to destroy your Mannadium tuners and get more of them out onto the field. And plus in this deck, Visas Starfrost turns into Scareclaw Reichheart, which just gets you so much advantage. So very important to be playing this at 3. It also helps you play through cards like Droll and Lockbird as well, because you now have a very big tuner that can turn into Vicious Astrolabe and you get more bodies from there. And then next up is 3 copies of Mannadium Riumheart, so not much to really say about this. One of the best engine cards in the deck. It's able to search any Mannadium card, helps you play around Veiler or Impermanence on like Scareclaw Reichheart as well. It's just incredibly strong. Definitely want to be maxing out on this. And then for the Mannadium tuners, we're playing 3 copies of Meek. Of course, Meek is just the best tuner. Just being able to summon a either level 2 or level 4 tuner from the deck is great. Being a water is also good as well, because it helps us access a very good Synchro monster in our extra deck. And then for the new Mannadium, we're playing 2 copies of Torrid. So the reason why I went with 2 copies is because I feel like the Mannadium balls are only ever good if you open specifically a way to destroy them. So like be it Obsidian or Visas Starfrost or Riumheart, and also you'd never want to open like multiples of them because you want them in deck to be able to special summon, and they're just very searchable. The reason I went with 2 Torrid specifically and not like 1, for example, is because I wanted the option to have Torrid actually summon out Torrid instead of going through a Meek, whether it's because we've already gone through all the Meeks, or if we don't need to go through Meek, we can just summon a Torrid as the extra body. I think 5 is a perfectly fine number. You could bump it up to 3, but there are times where like you just aren't able to like destroy them or whatever, and they just don't really do anything from there. And then for the rest of the Mannadium engine, we're playing 3 copies of Peaceful Planet Calarium. So this is the best field spell, aside from the fact that it does boost your light monsters by 100 attacking defense for every tuner you control. So it's a little unfortunate because it makes it so your Riumheart is no longer 1500, 2100 if you have tuners on your field or in the graveyard. So that's important to remember, not to get cheated. Also not to cheat if you're playing this deck. You can't actually special summon the tuners from hand if you control a Riumheart and they're like tuners on your field or grave, because it's no longer 1521. But aside from that, this card's incredibly strong. Just consistency and just extension after you destroy one of your Mannadium tuners. It's just so powerful, and you definitely want to max out on it. Next up, I played 3 copies of Mannadium Obsidian. So Obsidian, I think, is incredibly strong as well. It combos very well with any monster, and it makes me feel very safe when I'm comboing, because if at any point in my combo gets their effect negated, I can just activate this, destroy the monster, and then add Calarium, and then you can banish it from the grave to summon either Visas from hand or a Riumheart from hand to keep going from there. So very powerful card. And then for the remainder of the Mannadium engine, I'm playing 1 copy of Reframing. But now that Amritara is a card, you're able to search this very consistently during all of your combos, and it just prevents you from losing to cards like Dark Ruler, for example. So next up for the Scareclaw engine, we're playing 3 copies of Scareclaw Reichheart. So this is a very big Scareclaw engine compared to what most people were playing. But the reason I think Reichheart is so good is because it's a 1521 that combos with your Mannadium tuners, and it combos with a card like Vicious Astrolabe. It also helps you play through Handtraps, because most of the time people who either don't understand like what the deck does, or they don't really know where to handtrap, will probably handtrap the Scareclaw Reichheart. But if you have this hard drawn already throughout your combo, like it just doesn't matter. Even aside from that, this is a great normal summon. Just being able to search a monster reborn right away, it can do stuff on its own. You don't need to have like other combo cards with it if you're, let's say, in a very simplified game state, or if your opponent has a couple of hand traps to slow you down, because this can grab a reborn spell, instantly turn into the Reichheart. Reichheart searches the Primitive Planet, which searches Visas Starfrost, and then you can keep comboing from there, or set up a card like Baronne before you go into the Mannadium part of your combo. So it's a very powerful card, and I think you definitely want to play at least 2 copies of it. You don't necessarily have to play 3, but I personally like 3 copies of it just because I want to draw it, and I think it's a great card to have. To go alongside that, we're playing 2 copies of Scareclaw Arrival. So I think Scareclaw Arrival is, of course, not a great card to draw, and you don't necessarily want to see in your opening hand. But the fact is, since we're playing 3 Reichheart, we want its effect to be live all the time. to not only be able to grab a follow-up if it ever comes to that, but also having the second arrival means that you now have a great card to search with Visas Amritara. If you ever get into a situation where perhaps you had a little too much engine, you already had Mannadium Reframing, or you had Obsidian for reframing already, and you don't really need like an extra Calarium or something. Having the extra Scareclaw Arrival in your deck to search Alpha Amritara can be really good as extension. This is not once per turn, so you can still use multiple in a turn if you do happen to draw it. And then we're playing one copy of Reichphobia. So this is going to seem a little strange because we're playing such a big Scareclaw engine, but Reichphobia is not the greatest card to draw. If you start with Reichphobia only, it doesn't really get you anywhere. You can grab Reichheart or Visas, but then you need to have other cards for it to actually do something, whereas a card like Reichheart on its own can actually do quite a bit. Reichphobia is also not great because it plays a lot harder into Droll, whereas a card like Reichheart, if you normal summon it, you get something out of it and you keep the level 4 body on the board to actually play through the Droll and Lockbird, whereas with this you search the Reichheart or the Visas and then you get Drolled and it just really sucks. But of course you still have to play it because it's just such a powerful part of your combo. And then next up for the supplementary extender engine, I'm playing 3 copies of A Hero Lives and 1 copy of Elemental Hero Prisma. So this is completely personal preference. You don't have to play Prisma. You can play cards like Kashtira Fenrir as along with Scareclaw Kashtira, but I personally like A Hero Lives a lot, specifically because it's a 1-card combo, whereas Fenrir better going second, yes, and it's better under Shifter, but it doesn't actually do anything on your own to progress its combo. You need other cards with it. Whereas a card like Prisma, on the other hand, you're able to do a lot on its own, and A Hero List is just great because it definitely forces your opponent to respect it with Handtraps, because if they don't, you're going to get to a Baronne before you commit anything to your combo. The only time it's bad is when you draw Hero List and Prisma, but that's going to happen very, very rarely, so you don't really need to worry about that. And then for the last power spells in the deck, just consistency cards, 1 copy of Terraforming, 1 copy of Reinforcement of the Army. These are just searching some of your best cards in your deck, so you want to play these. And then for the Handtraps, this is going to depend on what your local tournament has a lot of. For me, I chose to go with 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, so this is just very generic, hits a lot of different decks out there, hits some of the meta decks very hard as well, like Labyrinth and Branded. I think it's pretty solid. The only gripe I really have about it is a tuner, so if you go second and then it's in your graveyard and then you have Calarium on the board, then you come up with that conflict with Riumheart not being 1521. That's the only really bad thing I have to say about Ash, but other than that, it's pretty solid because it just hits every matchup out there. 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird, so this is just a mandatory 3 of in every single deck now. This card is very good against other decks that aren't even Mannadium, so you definitely have to be main decking this format, I think. It's a little unfortunate because every time this card is in a format, it just says a lot about the state of the game at that point, but that's a topic for another video. Next up, we're playing 3 copies of Nibiru, the Primal Being. I think Nibiru is incredibly strong, even against Mannadium, because while it does have the option to play around Nibiru, you're not going to do that every single hand. There are going to be times where like you're playing through other hand traps, or your hand isn't that very specific 2-card combination, so Nibiru is still very good at hitting those decks. It also just checks a couple of other decks in the format as well, so you want to be playing it. And then lastly, we're playing 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence, so just a very solid hand trap going second card as well. So that's going to do it for the main deck. I played 42 cards. It's not 40, and I know that's like going to bother some people, but I think 42 is fine because there are quite a few cards you actually don't want to draw, but we're still keeping the ratio of hand traps and engine cards around the same. That means our consistency isn't really hindered. So moving now to the extra deck, we're playing 1 copy of Visas Amritara. A very powerful card. In this build specifically, since we're not playing Calamities, you actually don't need to do anything with this after you add the Mannadium counter trap. It just becomes a Visas Starfrost to summon back Lightheart with, or you just link it off later on. We are still playing the copy of Accel Synchro Stardust Dragon. This is arguably the most cuttable card in the extra deck, but it has come up enough for me to justify keeping in here, just because of how easy it is to make level 8s with like a level 4 Meek and Riumheart, for example. This can help you bridge into your higher level 10s if you don't need to make Amritara. You can make Bisteel, Dispatter, or Baronne from there, and it's just incredibly strong. Speaking of Baronne, for the level 10s, we're playing Baronne de Fleur. Very standard, part of your end board, just one of the best Synchro 10s out there. A very close second is Bestial Dispatter. You're able to make this a lot easier now with Crimson Dragon cheating it out, so you don't have to always go into Accel Synchro Stardust Dragon to make it. We are playing the copy of Chaos Angel. Chaos Angel is such a powerful card, and I definitely don't think you can cut this. Not only because it's a solid spot removal, but just against some decks, like, it's just a win condition. Some decks just actually don't have an out to it except through non-engine, so having Chaos Angel in your extra deck can be very good for that reason. It also protects your board from cards like Zeus, for example. If you just have this plus another Synchro 10, it's still very difficult for some decks to out. And then for the last Synchro 10, I'm still playing Ice Shade Jameer Adrian, and this card is incredible. It's so good against not only decks that would specifically banish, but just in general. If you think about it, it's usually going to trade 1-for-1 as sort of a quote-unquote negate against a lot of the decks out there, just because of the prevalence of field spells. For example, if your opponent plays any field spell, you chain this, banish the field spell, and that's essentially like an Omni Negate while giving you some extra protection. Ice Shade particularly shines against like the Runic decks and the Kashtira decks, just because of how much they want to destroy your cards and or banish your cards, and Ice Shade is just able to stop that. So a lot of the times in my build, I'm going to try to end on something like Ice Jade, Baronne, Dispatter with like Apollousa Countertrap or Chaos Angel Countertrap, since I don't play the Calamities. This is just incredibly hard for a lot of decks to out, and it also in a way sort of plays around super polymerization as well, since it is a water monster and your opponent can't really super poly anything with it. For the last Synchro monster, of course, we're playing Crimson Dragon. Helps you play around Nibiru and helps you cheat out Bestial Dispatter, just a mandatory part of the extra deck. And then we are playing 2 copies of Vicious Astrolabe. I didn't choose to play 3 because I found that 3 rarely ever comes up, and in the games it comes up, you're probably already losing, which means either you aren't able to establish a board or you had your board broken and are now like struggling to find resources. So I find that 2 Astrolabe is a pretty solid number. And then for the Link monsters, we're playing 1 copy of Lightheart. I think 1 is sufficient. There were like maybe 1 or 2 times where I wanted a second one, but it never really mattered in the grand scheme of things, where like it would cost me a game since I didn't have a second one. We are playing a bigger count of Reichheart as well, which means we're going to see Reichheart more often. We are playing 1 copy of Cross Sheep. It's an incredibly powerful extension tool in your extra deck, just being able to reborn something to make a Synchro, or just to link climb as well, and give your monsters attack, which is super cool as well. And then we're playing 1 copy of Apollousa Bow the Goddess. It's just a very standard link forward that you end on in this deck. I personally don't love ending on this. There are other options that are out there aren't like the greatest. You can end on Unchained Abomination, but that doesn't really do anything as in terms of disruption. You can end on Scareclaw Reichheart, which is okay, but it's only really good against decks that would threaten to Zeus you. But the thing is, against everything else, like Apollousa is just actually pretty solid, and a lot of decks will at least be able to be negated once before they're able to like beat over the Apollousa, for example. So I think you still want to play Apollousa in your extra deck. And then the last 3 cards in my extra deck are very unorthodox and not a lot of people play them, but I personally feel like these are some of the best cards in my extra deck. We're going to start things off with the Knightmare Unicorn and the Accesscode Talker. So why am I playing these cards? Because going second, if you're playing into cards like Droll and Lockbird and Dimensional Barrier, it's going to show off a lot of your power plays in terms of synchros. But now if you have access to like these link monsters to help you OTK, you have a 5300 Accesscode Talker plus a Vicious Astrolabe. That's just game. You have easy access to these monsters because your deck is very good at spitting out monsters onto the board, even if you aren't able to use them for synchro summons. So I think this is very good when going second, playing through cards as well, and it just makes it very simple to actually OTK your opponent because you no longer have to establish like 3 synchro monsters to do it. You can now just very simply just go like Cross Sheep, bring back, summon Astrolabe, bring back a dude, and then you just have 1 more body, and then that's Accesscode Astrolabe, and that's just game at that point. Definitely recommend you guys try this because it's so strong and so good at playing through disruption when going second. And then the final card in my extra deck is a Bagooska. Bagooska is like the deck's plan B if you do get Drolled. I wanted a way to beat Droll that was actually in engine and didn't rely on cards like Crossout Designator, for example. I think Bagooska is particularly good just because we also play a heavy count of Scareclaw Reichheart. We have more level 4s to actually make Bagooska with, but most of the time, like if you just have access to like some combination of like Calarium, Riumheart, stuff like that, you're going to be able to get to a Bagooska, and your opponent most of the time, unless they have another card like Imperm or Book of Moon, is just going to pass their turn back to you, and then you're just going to win the game from there. So Bagooska is an incredibly powerful card I also recommend you guys trying, just because you don't want to rely on cards like Crossout Designator or Call by the Grave to actually beat cards like Drone Lockbird, which is just going to be everywhere this format. So that's going to do it for the deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section below. Just keep in mind that this deck is incredibly powerful, but it's also kind of difficult to play. A few of the losses I had were because I wasn't really playing the deck optimally, but I think that just says a lot about how strong the deck is. If the games you're losing are because of like player, then I think it shows that the deck can be pretty strong. You actually master it and play it correctly. So with all that being said, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.